Welcome back, everyone. Another episode of Coffee with the Commish. Continuing to make our way through our 30 MLB team previews in 30 days leading up to opening day. Coming back at you this time with another NL East team, taking a look at the Philadelphia Phillies. Appreciate all the positive feedback that we've had on the videos so far. Continue to check these out. Continue to expect these every single day. Bringing back my guy Gio once again, talking all things Phillies. Well, not going to waste any time. We'll just bring him in. Welcome back, dude.
What's up, Commish? How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. I'm excited to talk Phillies. This is a very interesting team to talk about. Coming off of a World Series run last year, new manager halfway through the season. Bryce Harper, MVP candidate, the best hitter in that lineup, is going to miss the first couple months of the season. I'm very, very excited to see what transpires this season for this group.
Yeah, they're an exciting team. They add to a division which it being a baseball fan for such a long time, for so long it felt like in those 2010s everyone wanted to talk up the NL East, and I felt like the division kind of like always fell over itself. Like it was just the media darling division, but it never really produced.
It's that East Coast bias, that Northeast Coast bias.
Yeah,
every year it was like every team in this division is going to win 100 games.
Right, and it didn't really produce anything. This year, I find myself ironically a part of that group where I'm talking about the NL East, and I'm like genuinely excited, as I think it will be like one of the most talented and closest divisions to decide in baseball. And the Phillies are just such a great team to jump into that mix. Like everyone thought it was just going to kind of be Atlanta and the Mets, and John Middleton, Dombrowski, and Thompson, like in this trio, is giving everyone a run for their money. They make a World Series appearance. It's such a great team, and the Phillies fan base has always, in my opinion, been a really great baseball fan base in Philly. So it's exciting, man. I'm very much happy to talk about them preseason.
Yeah, why don't we start there before we dive in on a player by player analysis? Let's start with Dombrowski, right? Dubbed the billionaire whisperer for his ability to get all of these rich owners in Major League Baseball to dig deep into their pocketbooks. We've seen just the last couple of seasons, right, with the additions that the Phillies have had, and Dombrowski's reputation as well as a general manager, as a president of baseball operations now with the Phillies, as someone who's all in every year, right? He believes every year when you show up to spring training, if you're not trying to win a World Series, you're not participating the way that you need to be participating. Went out, was able to convince Craig Kimbrell to come in and take a role that's as a non-traditional member of like a closer by committee, which is the first time Kimbrell has seemingly been enthused about that in his career. Went and acquired Gregory Soto, Matt Strahm, an underrated pickup, Castellanos, Schwarber coming over in the last couple of years. He was very aggressive at the trade deadline last season to bolster that bullpen, which helped them make a run. Wasn't afraid to bring Rob Thompson out from deeper in the dugout and get rid of Joe Girardi. So why don't we start there? What are your thoughts on Dombrowski's relationship with ownership and, of course, Rob Thompson and the impact that he made on the team after he took over in the early portion of the 2022 campaign?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of Dombrowski. If you really dive in and do your research on the guy, he's been in baseball since 1978. He started with the Montreal Expos. He then moved on to a role with the Miami Marlins when they came into the league. You know, he saw a World Series championship with them in 1997. He leaves in the early 2000s, and he takes over a Detroit team that had basically, I think they lost 119 games in 2003. He comes on to that role in 2002. He fires the general manager, fires the head coach. He puts Jim Leyland, in my opinion, Hall of Fame coach. I'm pretty sure he is a Hall of Famer, but I won't speak to that definitively. One of the best coaches basically in MLB history. And he ushers in I would argue, a golden era in Detroit in the mid 2000s. You know, I don't know if you collected baseball cards, but you know, Maglio Ordonez with his like locks that flew in. I'm sure our Detroit fans will remember the golden days of Ivan Rodriguez and those.
I don't need the baseball cards. I'm a Cleveland fan. I remember how good those teams were. I remember.
He ushered in a golden age for them in the mid 2000s. Then again in the early 2010s, where he oversaw the World Series run with Verlander back in 2012. You know, the Scherzer days, the Miguel Cabrera, Prince Fielder. You know, they didn't win that World Series, and then he goes to the Red Sox, and he ushers a championship for the Red Sox in 2018. And then now he's with the Phillies, and in only 1 year of him being the GM and president of baseball operations for Philadelphia, they've already made the World Series. I mean, the guy just knows how to win. I think he's building like a Hall of Fame career legacy in terms of, being ushered in there as an executive. The Phillies couldn't ask, I think, for a better GM or president of baseball. Like, he knows how to take I would argue a small market team like Detroit and put them in a position where he knows how to develop players. He knows how to build a winning culture. He knows who to put. Like, the fact that he put Jim Leyland in that role, and Jim Leyland went on to be one of the best coaches for Detroit in history, right? I mean, the guy just knows who to put in the right places. And like you said, he's always been known for getting marquee free agents and getting owners to spend the money. So what a great feeling if you're a Phillies fan to just have that guy. He's 66 years old, so you're probably going to have him for maybe another decade in your front office. And I think that's just great for Philly. And he saw something in Rob Thompson, and I would trust him. I would definitely trust that judgment because I like Rob Thompson's resume. I like how humble he is. And I think it spells great for a Philly franchise that sometimes gets a little big about itself, and Thompson's a little bit of a fresh air for that. So you got a good yin and yang. Like, Dombrowski can really fit into that. Like, we're Philly, we're going to own this. And Thompson's like, we're going to do good. I think that's a good yin and yang for Phillies fans. I think we'll see some success for that for sure.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. It was certainly off to a good start last year, bringing in Thompson. He goes 65-46 after taking over for Girardi. He was 22-29 to start the season. And people forget too, they went 65-46, but Bryce Harper was on the shelf for a considerable amount of time in that span. Even when he came back, he was a shell of the player that he could be because he was seriously injured, right? They had Gene Segura on the men for a while in there as well. So Zack Wheeler missed a month of action. So it's not like he had an easy job in resurrecting that team. They had some major flaws, the defense, the bullpen. So Thompson being able to come in and press the right buttons, and Dombrowski pushing the right button in terms of changing the manager, I could not agree more. I think they have a really, really solid trio in their decision-making tree there. And
right. And
the fans are lucky to have him.
Absolutely. And Thompson's been around since 2018. He got the job under Gabe Gapler, and then he kept his job under Joe Girardi. So it's not like he's like new in any kind of way. He was a bench coach for them from 2018 to 2022. Before that, he was with the Yankees. Woohoo. And he was in the minor league system for them. He was head of player development for a time in the early 2000s with the Yankees. I mean, he was a bench coach for Joe Girardi back in 2008. So he saw the World Series championship. So he knows what it is to be on winning ball clubs. And I think it resonates with players too. When you've been around from 2018 to 2022, you're the stability with the coaching changes that they went through in the short tenure. Mm-hmm. And I think that really resonated with players. So I'm excited to see how Thompson does. That last year was really his first year taking a crack at the big job. And I think he'll actually do well. I don't think you'll ever get him to talk about himself, but I think he'll do well.
Yeah. Also voted second most handsome manager in baseball last season. So he's got that going for him as well. But let's dive into the roster. This is a roster loaded with stars. They have 5 guys on contracts, paying them $100 million or more. One of the guys who's not part of those top 5 in the money situation is Aaron Nola, coming off another sensational season. A guy who is often overlooked as one of the truly premier starting pitchers in the league. Last year, he became the first pitcher in 138 years to have more than 230 strikeouts and fewer than 30 walks in a single season. Give me your thoughts on Nola at the top of this rotation and what you're expecting out of him going into 2023.
So big note on Aaron Nola going into that free agency aspect. So Philly picks up his club option, exercises that, gets him on a good deal. But, he's 31 and going to go out into the free agency. And as we've seen with pitchers like Carlos Rodon or, other marquee free agents that hit the market, he's due for a big payday. I don't think that's going to worry a guy like Dombrowski based off the points that we just made. So I think they're going to pay him a lot of money. He comes through their system. I think that they're invested. I think he made a lot of smart decisions in his pitch mix in 2022. And I think that was very exciting. So one of the things that he did was he threw his sinker a lot more than what he has in prior years, right? So his sinker, he was throwing about 14% of the time in 2021. He jumps that up to about 18% of the time, 2022. It's the difference of him pitching that sinker 420 times to pitching it 572 times. And where did he pitch it more? Against right-handed batters. And he saw a lot of success, right? So with that sinker, you're talking about a batting average of 178. So when he was throwing that against rights, he got a ton of success. I think it's going to be a killer pitch for him even going into 2023. But not just the sinker, though. I mean, his other pitch that he increased was his cutter. And he was like, in 2021, he barely threw his cutter. It was like 1 point something percent of the time, if I remember correctly from my notes. And, you know, that cutter was almost just like an experimental pitch for him. Like, yeah, I guess I'll throw this every now and then. He jumped that up about 5%, right? But he threw it 146 times against right-handed hitters. And again, saw a lot of success. So, you know, we can pull that up on the screen so guys can see it off Baseball Savant. You know, that's where we do a lot of our research for pitch mix. And, you know, he saw a 234 batting average against that pitch. It's just a good arsenal, and it was already a solid arsenal when he was in 2021. I think the fact that he's focused in on 2 pitches and it increased his performance, that makes me even more excited going into a contract year. So I think we'll see more of that sinker. I think we'll see more of that cutter. You know, he decreased his fastball usage a lot. So that, I think that's neither here or there. His changeup kind of took a little bit of a tattooing in 2022. So I'll be watching that going into 2023. You know, maybe he drops that usage, or, you know, somebody just went wrong, because in 2021, those numbers weren't, you know, he wasn't getting tattooed in 2021 and tattooed in 2022, where I would suggest maybe he should just drop that pitch altogether. But love his arsenal. Love that he's a hometown guy. Philly loves him. I think Dombrowski is going to sign a big old check, and I think John Middleton's not going to hesitate to put a bunch of zeros on it. So I would expect him back in 2024, and I think that I like him actually as a sneaky Cy Young guy if he kind of increases some of these pitches.
I like him regardless. He's 15-1 to win the Cy Young right now. The number one thing that you have to be able to do to contend for a Cy Young award is you have to throw a lot of innings, right? You have to be out there. You have to rack up the strikeouts. You have to be available for your team. And when you look at what Aaron Nola has done across the last 6 seasons, pull up his fan graphs here, 168 innings, 212 innings, 202 innings. The COVID season was available through 70 innings, 180 innings, 205 innings, right? So Aaron, he's thrown the most innings in the National League across the last 6 seasons, consistently there for his team at the top of the rotation. He goes out there, he gets ahead in the count. He's reliable every 5th day for this group. I'm a huge fan of Aaron Nola. I mean, just the crazy thing about him is he continues to, quote unquote, be unlucky, right? You look at his expected stats year over year, and he's almost always underperforming relative to what is going on under the scenes with his peripherals. And a lot of that has to do with the Phillies defense, right? So like these fielding independent metrics like xERA and FIP, some of that looks better than it probably ever will be when you have Kyle Schwarber in left field. When last year and the year before, when you had some defensive issues at shortstop, Alec Bohm at third base is always going to be a liability, right? Rhys Hoskins is far from an elite option at first base, even though it's a less important position on the diamond. But I think some exciting things to look at from Aaron Nola's perspective this year is you have Brandon Marsh out there again in center field, elite at one of the most important positions, definitely the most important position in the outfield. You bring in Trea Turner, who was flash Gold Glove potential at shortstop. You have a young budding star at second base, at least with his glove, and he's gonna be a nice fixture in the middle of the diamond for Philadelphia for years to come. And then you have JT Realmuto behind the plate, right? So I think Aaron Nola's got a chance to improve on these on his actual numbers relative to his expected numbers. Last year we saw 3.25 ERA, which was about a half run higher than his expected ERA, and even higher than his FIP, which again is a fielding independent metric. So for me, the pitch mix changes that you mentioned, the cutter proved itself to be a lethal weapon for him. I know you mentioned the batting average overall against that pitch, but it was really, really tough against right-handed batters, right? Held him to a 195 batting average, just the 2 home runs and the one double, so 3 extra base hits and 41 plate appearances. And what you can see is if you go to Fangraphs and you look at his splits, one of the reasons he likely threw this pitch a lot more is because in 2021, he started to see some struggles against right-handed batters. You go down here, you go look at his advanced stats, you can see had a 354 FIP, a 122 whip, K percentage was lower against righties than it was against lefties. Walk percentage a little bit higher. Batting average was significantly higher. So all of this tells you that righties were getting a better look at Aaron Nola than left-handed batters were at the plate. Well, you introduce a cutter that they have not seen before, and then, as you mentioned, the increased usage of that sinker, which did a good job missing barrels last season, and improved to the point where he was actually a little bit better in some of these areas against righties than he was against lefties, but overall elite against both, right? So you see the FIP at 2.5, about a base runner per inning, walks plus hits per inning pitch. The K percentage went up significantly. The walk percentage ended up being minuscule, and these are all great signs for a guy that you're looking to invest in preseason on the Cy Young at 15-1. I think Aaron Nola stays healthy. He's in a walk year due to get paid. He's got all the motivation. He's got all of the skill sets that you look for in a guy like this. The defense is a concern, no doubt, but
Sure.
everything that you want from the guy who is contending for the award, Aaron Nola checks the box. And at 15-1, he's definitely worth a roll of the dice in spring training.
Amen. And I think that Philly fans can sit back and take a deep breath and relax that he's in a walk here. I'm gonna read a quote real quick, and I wanted to do it at the beginning of the show, but I've had it written here. John Middleton, who's now the front face of the ownership group for the Phillies, he's been involved with the team since the early 90s when he bought in, about 94. This is his exact quote. Just last year, "Nobody cares about whether I make money or not," Middleton told the Philadelphia Inquirer. "If my legacy is that I didn't lose any money owning a baseball team on an annual operating basis, that's a pretty sad legacy. It's about putting trophies in the cases." I think it's fair to say that if Aaron Nola comes out and performs the way that we think he's going to perform, I wouldn't be shocked if they have a deal done mid-season, right? Or that like Dombrowski's going to walk into Middleton's office and be like, "Hey, I want to pay," and then middle of the sentence, Middleton's like, "Aaron Nola, absolutely. Here's the check. I already have had it written for the last 3 months." So, like, I'm really psyched about Aaron Nola. I also think that it's great for Philly fans that he's only 31 years old going into next season. So, it's, when you pay him out for a contract, you're paying him out for years to come. And we've seen pitchers as they've aged, they actually age a lot more gracefully now in the game. A lot more data to suggest, that you don't need that 96 to 98 mile per hour fastball to be the only thing that makes you a Cy Young contender nowadays. So I think it's great. And I'm very excited that, Aaron Nola will be leading a Philadelphia team when what I like to see in well-developed franchises is that they pay to keep the guys they've developed. So I would love to see Phillies re-sign him, make him the face of their franchise when it comes to the mound. And I think that they can look forward to that for a couple more years.
Amen to that, especially if you got Turner and Harper there for another decade. You're
Right.
going to need some pitching, right? I know there's some guys coming up through the minor league system, but
so on the ace conversation, though, I'm going to fire the question back at you. So where do you think Zack Wheeler is going to be at going into 2023? We kind of pointed some things out when we talked about before video, kind of like our research prep. He had that 97.2 miles per hour in 2021. It was averaging around 95.9. We can walk through why we maybe saw that dip. Was it really a dip? He dealt with that forearm tendonitis injury at the end of August, and some stats that, I think went north when they weren't supposed to. What I love about him, obviously, is his pitch mix as well and what he throws. Like, I love that he throws that sinker hard and inside against right-handed batters. It's one of his best pitches. It's just fun to watch guys completely fall over themselves when they try to hit that pitch. So, where do you see Zack Wheeler in comparison to Aaron Nola? And where do you see like those two guys meshing in the rotation to be the best in the NL East when you got teams like the Mets and the Braves?
Aaron Nola is the ace of the staff. I think everything about Nola's body of work supports this. People are going to look at his 2021 service level stats and especially relative to what Wheeler did, and I think they're going to make the co-ace argument. But this is Aaron Nola's staff. Zack Wheeler is 1B or 2. No doubt in my mind here. That being said, Zack Wheeler is everything that an organization could want from a front-end starter in the rotation. You pull up his Savant chart from last year, and there's a ton of red, right? 94th percentile average exit velocity, 76th percentile hard hit percentage. So does a phenomenal job limiting hard contact against him, which is obviously a main criteria that you want in a guy that's going out there and throwing 150, 175 innings. K percentage is strong. Walk percentage is strong. So what that means is when there's guys on base, he has an opportunity to get out of jams because he can get guys to swing and miss. He does a good job limiting free passes, making opponents earn their way on base. The spin rates are good. The extension is fantastic. So biomechanically, he's a very strong pitcher. You mentioned the dip in velocity and question whether or not there actually was a dip in velocity. What you want to look at is there a dip in velocity and is it going to be sustainable, or is this something that will come back in 2023? You can see, right, as you mentioned, 97 miles an hour average fastball velocity in 2021. It dipped about a whole mile an hour in 2022. But you mentioned the injury that he sustained near the end of the regular season that forced him to miss from August 21st to September 20th. So pretty much spot on a month right there. When Zack Wheeler came back in September, the velocity came back, suggesting that this probably was an injury that just he needed to shut down for a little bit to get completely healthy. And he was probably pitching through a little bit of an injury for some time. When you look at his velo by month, you can see that he was still sitting about 96 early in the season and started to lose it a little bit as he got more into the dog days of summer. When he came back in September, that fastball was back above 96 miles an hour. You can see that when he came back, the results were outstanding. I know he played Washington and the Cubs in this small sample size, but giving up 1 earned run and 15 innings of work with a 15-to-1 K to walk ratio in that span is phenomenal, regardless of who the opponent is. These are still major league hitters at this level. So Zack Wheeler, for me, he's not the co-ace, but he would be the ace of a lot of different rotations around the league. For me, on the betting side of this, you're looking at him. He's 17-1 to win the NL Cy Young Award. The reason that I'm not investing in him preseason is because you look at some of the durability concerns, right? He's had a couple of seasons where 182 innings, 195, 213 innings. Last year, he missed that month of action, 153 innings, which did work against him in the Cy Young conversation, right? There were definitely more deserving candidates, so it's not like his lack of innings kept him from winning the award. But even if his numbers were better than this, he would not have won the award with only 150 innings. It's something to monitor going forward. For me, Zack Wheeler's a guy I would have no issue investing in let's say June or July if he's having a great season, if he's healthy, the velo, the spin rates, all of that stuff looks good. But I would rather pay 9-1 or 8-1 for Zack Wheeler in the Cy Young market after he's gotten through half of the season, rather than investing early in the season and then have him miss a little bit of time with some tendonitis or a maintenance injury that requires a short stint on the injured list.
Yeah, he's interesting too when you look at contract. So they signed him back in 2020 to a 5-year, $118 million deal. I just pulled up how much he's going to be making this season. He's set to make a base salary about $24.5 million and $23.5 million in 2024. And then he's an unrestricted free agent in 2025. So, Commish, play GM for a second. He's 35 years old, 2025. It's not like Aaron Nola, again, when we talked about kind of like the aging gracefully with he's a very hard thrower and he puts a lot of stress on his body. When you come to that age 35 season, teams will pay a guy at 35 years old just to put a guy at the front of their rotation. Do you think the Phillies take a risk on that? Or do you think that they kind of say to themselves, listen, we have 2 years of this Aaron Nola, Zack Wheeler team up, and we better optimize it because we think that, come 2025, we might let Zack Wheeler go.
Yeah, Zack Wheeler is probably going to be out the door, and regardless of effectiveness, I think this will be a guy that they let walk. If you've been paying attention to any of the local news in Philadelphia, they have this kid Andrew Painter who's only 19, going on 20 years old, legitimately making a case to be the number 5 starter out of camp. He will for sure be in the rotation at some point this season, and he will be an impact player for this organization this year and for the next decade plus. I mean, this kid is the real deal. He's a number 12 overall prospect per Baseball Prospectus in the entire major leagues. They also have Mick Abel and Griff McGarry here that will be coming up through the system, both top 51 prospects. So in my mind, it's less about the concerns with Wheeler's durability. It's less about his velocity, because people forget too, Zack Wheeler is a guy who found success before he turned into an elite strikeout pitcher. So he can get outs on the ground. I think he's a guy, you mentioned a minute ago, that pitchers nowadays are able to age a little bit more gracefully. Zack Wheeler is a high IQ pitcher. He has a deeper pitch mix, so he's a guy who would probably be able to reinvent himself and throw a little bit more of the softer stuff, more curveball stuff like that. later in his career and still be effective. But the Phillies might not necessarily be the team that are willing to pay for that, especially if these young kids come up and they do produce at a high level. I think Zack Wheeler, if you're choosing between him and Aaron Nola, you're unquestionably, in my mind, choosing Aaron Nola, who is the younger of the two options, the more durable of the two, the more proven of the two, and again, the guy who's been there longer. So Zack Wheeler is going to be out the door in a couple of years, regardless of what he does for Philadelphia. I don't necessarily think that is a knock on him whatsoever.
Yeah, so let's stay on that note since you brought up Painter, just on younger pitchers who took a step forward for Philadelphia. Ranger Suarez, younger guy, came up through the Philly system. He's only 27 years old. We talked about other guys who are not similar, but just similar situations, like Kyler Wright, for example, right? Like worked his way through the Atlanta system. Now he's kind of like found his tune. Ranger Suarez added 2 pitches to his arsenal in 2022. We saw a curveball and a cutter that we did not see in 2021, and he threw them pretty substantially. It's not like, sometimes when a pitcher's trying out a new pitch for a season, he may only throw it 1%, maybe 2% of the time, just kind of get a feel for it. He came out with this cutter and fastball, and he threw that cutter about 10% of the time, curveball about 8% of the time. What are your thoughts about, this young guy coming up for Philly, adding 2 not elite pitches, but 2 very good pitches to an arsenal that makes him more of a deep pitcher and can go deeper into games?
For me, Ranger Suarez is a great number 3 option in a rotation, right? You have your ace and co-ace, or your 1A and 1B again with Nola and Zack Wheeler. Those 2 guys are the guys that every 5 days are going to give you a chance to win, and a lot of times will go out there and help you win a game that maybe the offense doesn't deserve to win in certain cases. Ranger Suarez, to me, this is a guy, if you look at his savant chart, right, he did an incredible job last season limiting hard contact. He did it better than almost any pitcher in the league. You can see 73rd percentile average exit velocity, 73rd percentile hard hit percentage.
And he also gets guys out on the ground a lot. His ground ball percentages are great.
Yeah, I was just going to say, there was 409 pitchers last year who threw at least 40 innings. Only 28 of them induced a higher ground ball rate than Ranger Suarez, and only 4 pitchers who threw at least 100 innings allowed less hard contact than Ranger Suarez. So both of those things are major boons for him going forward. I think if there are red flags with Suarez, we can go back and we can take a look at the Phillies and what we're looking at here. I know there's a lot going on the screen, but I can explain this for everyone here. F strike percentage is simply first pitch strike percentage. We've talked about this in other videos. Pitchers can do a lot more with their pitch arsenal when they get ahead in the count against a batter 0-1 compared to when they fall behind 0-1. This is concerning to me that he only threw a first pitch strike 57.6% of the time last year. You can see the ace and the co-ace of this staff, right, at 69.2, 67.2% last year. There's a huge difference in that 10%, right? And what you can do with that 10%. The fact that Ranger Suarez doesn't have overpowering swing and miss stuff means he relies a lot more on those ground balls, which we talked about a second ago, to get himself out of jams, to keep his run prevention metrics low. He's not the safest guy in the world to invest in. He's not the most reliable guy in the world to invest in going forward for those reasons. There's definitely reasons to be optimistic, though, right? I mean, he's still in his 20s, right? He's still ascending. He added the 2 pitches last year. You talked about the cutter and the curveball that make his arsenal a little bit deeper, allows him to attack righties and lefties in a little bit more sophisticated manner. So I expect Suarez to have another season sort of similar to what he did last year, 3.65 ERA, 3.78 xERA, and a 3.87 FIP. So the Phillies will take that out of their third guy, right? But there are definitely red flags here to be mindful of going into 2023. Correctable ones, things that I don't think blow up, but just things to keep in the back burner.
Do you make anything out of his fastball in 2022? I mean, hitters tattooed his fastball in 2022. They batted 346 against it, a 570 slug. And the season before in 2021, it actually was a pretty reliable pitch for him. It was, 173 batting average, 213 slug. So do you read anything into that? Do you think that might just be an anomaly because he's kind of like experimenting with his pitch mix, so we don't really know how that fastball fits in yet? Or do you think maybe we see him actually lay off and maybe throw that cutter more in 2023?
I think truly, I think it had a lot to do with the velocity. And I know this might sound a little bit counterintuitive after what we talked about with Zack Wheeler, but a half a mile an hour difference in fastball velocity when you don't have overpowering stuff. So you can see it average 93.7 miles an hour in 2021 and 93.2 miles an hour last season in 2022. This doesn't seem like a huge deal, right? But when you go back up to a Savant chart, you can also see this is a fastball that generates not a lot of spin. And in 2021, it was a lot of the same, right? Second percentile in spin rate. So it's not a very high quality fastball relative to his peers. So if there's any velocity reduction here at all, it does set that pitch up to be a lot more hittable, a lot easier to handle for the opposition. So I think it's real, right? I think it's not a coincidence that we saw a cutter and a curveball be introduced here. I think we've seen a lot of pitchers here in recent years who have started to throw stuff that moves a little bit more, especially if they don't have elite velocity with their four seam, a pitch that is mostly straight, right? And if you go down here and you look at the numbers that he was able to generate with the pitches that moved even a little bit, right? The sinker was very good, 220 batting average against. The changeup was much better than the fastball. All of these pitches were much better than his fastball. So that's another reason to be potentially optimistic with Suarez is if he does come out in 2023 and you do see a rather significant decrease in the fastball usage, I think that could be a sign that the Phillies, a newfound analytically driven organization that was not the case before Dombrowski got there. Dombrowski's really infused a lot of really intelligent thinking and use of advanced math to turn this franchise around. I would not be surprised to see Suarez continue to tinker with his pitch mix a little bit, and maybe we do see even more of that curveball and more of that cutter in the new season.
Yeah, I think Suarez is very encouraging. I think if you're a Philadelphia Phillies fan, like to slot him in right behind those two guys. Again, another guy coming up through your system. Love the fact that he's only 27 because again we can see them tinker on with that. The guy who we have left to talk about in the rotation before we get to that fifth spot and who's going to be competing against it is Walker, the guy that they got over there from the New York Mets in a big signing this offseason. One of the things when I was looking into Walker, you can tell he's becoming a more craftier pitcher as he's been getting older. So, for example, he's had a splits finger that he threw to lefties quite a bit. He used it in 2021 against lefties, kind of laid off against it in righties. We saw the complete opposite going into 2022. He threw that split finger around 14% of the time. He started throwing it 27% of the time in 2022, and he was starting to throw it way more against right-handed batters and a successful pitch. What we also saw is he laid off his sinker going into 2022. So, it wasn't again a pitch that was getting destroyed in 2021 for him, but it definitely was, well accepted by batters when they saw sinkers come in against them. They're like, okay, that sounds good. Like I can actually hit this. But we saw some detriment to it in 2022. And, he introduces the cutter, which you can see on our graph that we put up there. I mean, if you look at where he was throwing that cutter and the increase that he did in 2022, according to 2021, another pitch that he's starting to feel more comfortable in. What do you make of the signing of Walker? Do you think this is a good contract for them? Do you think it maybe smelled of a little bit of desperation for him? Where do you see him slotting in, especially when we're looking at teams like the Braves, who their fourth guy is a Charlie Morton, the Mets, their fourth guy is a Jose Quintana, and then you look at the Phillies and it looks like their fourth guy is going to be Walker. Where do you think he compares?
He's not dramatically worse than any of those guys, but I think he's definitely the worst out of those three. To me, it's not a move that smells of desperation. It's a move that smells of we're in win now mode, right? So we'll go get a guy like Taijuan Walker, and even if he's not elite, he's going to go out there and he's going to compete. They're familiar with him, right? He's been in the division for a while, so that's not an understatement, right? To go get a guy who's been with a rival organization and can come and share some of that knowledge with you. I think that's worth a few $1 million in and of itself.
Well, and they paid him a lot. Like it was like 4-year deal, around $70 million,
$72 million.
Yeah,
that they're probably for.
They paid him a good amount of money to come over and jump ship from the Mets over to the Philly organization. And I just think sometimes when you look at what he's offering, like that's a lot of money to pay for a good amount of time to just have your fourth guy in the rotation for a guy that, again, I think he's just getting craftier as he's getting older. And we might even see more of those pitches again, like the cutter and the split finger, see even more of an increase. But that's a lot of money to pay to a guy to slot fourth Like, that's almost like a guy you're paying at 3 in your rotation.
Yeah, for me, it was less the money. It was more the years, the commitment to him being there for 4 years. That was surprising to me because so he has that cutter that he really introduced more frequently last year that performed really well. That the split finger has been elite, right? That's not a secret. It's been one of his best pitches throughout his career, and we can see last year, like you mentioned, the 195 batting average against. Really did a good job suppressing damage against that pitch, the cutter as well. So in my mind, the Phillies, right, they're a team that, again, they've introduced a lot more advanced analytics into their thought process in recent seasons. They have a manager now that seems really well equipped to merge advanced analytics with the fact that baseball is still a game played by human beings. So I don't think it's a terrible signing. It was a little bit surprising to me because of the strides that Bailey Falter made, who we're going to talk about in a second, at the end of last season, and with the idea that Andrew Painter is coming up and that there is some more young talent that should become available. So I was a little surprised to see the 4 years commitment. But when you look at a guy like Charlie Morton making $20 million a year, I don't think it's crazy that Taijuan Walker got $72 million, especially with the TV deals and the money that's expected to come into Major League Baseball across the next few seasons. That might look like a relative bargain 3 years from now by the time that contract is about to expire. I'm just not a huge Taijuan Walker fan. I never have been. He's been a little bit more durable the last couple of seasons. You can see 157 innings, 159 innings, but people forget, right? The 3 seasons before that, he threw a total of 67 and a third innings. And I know that includes the COVID campaign in there as well, but 2019, only 1 inning. The year before that, only 13 innings. A guy that's going into his age 30 season, there's a lot of mileage on this arm for an arm that has not been considerably healthy throughout his career, right? It's not like he's thrown 3,000 innings or anything like that, but the fact that he's thrown a lot of innings relative to the injuries that he's sustained, which have been pretty significant injuries, is something that personally I would not have gone out and got him. I understand why the Phillies did. It's not, I just don't see him being an impact player. I think he's a guy that you go out there and you hope that the offense shows up when he's on the mound every 5th day.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the long-term commitment to him was very interesting, and he might be a candidate that we talk about in a couple of years from now, who will kind of like how we talked in our Mets video about Carlos Carrasco, right? That guy who, will just have a bunch of young talent coming up. He kind of will start the season with the team and take a break and take a roll back. But, that kind of leads us into that conversation now about that 5th spot in the rotation. I know you're big on Painter. Painter only pitched about 5 or 6 games for AA last year for the Phillies. So where do you stand? I mean, do you really think that they'll promote him that quickly? I still think you'll see some minor league time. I don't think that he'll come out of like spring training and then all of a sudden we see Painter on the major league rotation.
It seems crazy to say that, but
that's not a lot of games in the minor. It's different from hitters sometimes. We see that with the Braves. Vaughn Grissom only plays about 22 games in AA minors, and there's a significant injury on the field with Ozzie Albies, and he gets immediately brought up. But, teams tend to be more cautious with their prospects, especially high draft picks. I mean, he was a 1st-round draft pick for Philly. I think that they'll still be a little cautious with him. If he comes up to the rotation, I think that'll be really interesting and fun to watch. I'm all about, if a guy in the minors is good enough to play, he should get promoted as fast as possible. I really don't like how teams hold their players in the minors for more control contract-wise. I understand it from the
they can't do that anymore. That was one change in the most recent CBA, is the teams no longer get that same advantage. That's why we saw last year a couple of teams start the year with their prospects on the opening day roster right from the way. So
good catch. I missed that. So
no, it's a point that it sort of went under the radar, and
right.
It is a really interesting point because now you don't have that advantage of team control. So when you hear the Phillies brass talk about Painter legitimately contending for that 5th spot in the rotation, I think you have to take them serious, especially because the beat writers can read BS better than anyone, right? The beat writers don't print stuff for no reason, right? The beat writers take what what management says, what the decision makers say, and then they interpret it. They offer their own spin to it, their own predictions. And the beat writers are sitting here saying Andrew Painter might be this 5th guy to break camp. My thinking is Bailey Falter is still the number 5 guy, regardless of how well we see Andrew Painter pitch in spring training. And he looked sensational a couple of days ago when he made his spring training debut, which has me really excited to see him at the big league level. But like you said, I mean, the guy threw 36 2/3 innings last year at at the A level, 28 innings at the Double A level. So from a workload perspective, I don't know how you can have a guy like that in your rotation for the entire season without eventually having to shut him down or move him to the bullpen or have him on some sort of innings or pitch count limit that ends up causing you to go into the bullpen more frequently than you would like on his day in the rotation. So I think Falter gets there. The other reason I think Falter ends up being this guy is because he's not devoid of supporters within the organization. There are guys that have significant weight in the decision-making process that believe Falter is a really solid candidate to be a back-end rotation starter for a long time. You can see he's going into his age 26 season, so it's not like this is a guy on the back end of his career that you could think about designating for assignment or just throwing away as scrap. Last season, he made some major strides towards the end of the year. You look at his stats from the end of July until the end of the regular season. Had an ERA of a flat 3. FIP was a little bit higher than that, so maybe suggesting a little bit more regression. But he's got excellent command. He pounds the strike zone, so he's going to get hit. He's going to give up a lot of hard contact. He's not a high-end prospect. He never will be a guy that you'll put at the front end of your rotation. But he's going to eat innings. He has a little bit more major league experience. He offers a lefty look in the rotation that I still think is valuable. He threw more innings last year, right? I mean, the idea of getting 120 or 130 or 150 innings from your fifth guy, I think is really important. So even though he doesn't lack the ups, even though he doesn't have the upside that Painter has, he's not as sexy. He's not this really fun story to follow. I do think I agree with you where he breaks camp with the team, and then we do see Painter get ramped up a little bit more slowly, and then Painter joins the team at a point in the season where maybe he is a little bit more unleashed and they don't have to worry so much about his pitch count and his innings limit on a start-by-start basis.
Well, listen, I like Andrew Painter a lot. So the guy's 6'7", 210 pounds, and he can throw you a 99-mile-per-hour fastball. Now, if he were a lefty, it would stink of Randy Johnson. He's a right-handed pitcher,
yeah.
Right? But, that's a dominating performance. And you mentioned the spring game. Carlos Correa came out after that game and said, yeah, that kid's going to be a star. Quote. So, Carlos Correa has been around for a long time. And if he's already looking at this kid, 6'7", throwing at 99 miles per hour at guys, that is golden to Phillies fans. I would be super excited. And the guy, I think he's relatively young. Was he 19 or 20?
19 going on 20, yep.
Okay, so, Jesus. The great addition for them. I just think that Dombrowski's been around the block. You throw a kid out too soon with not a lot of experience, especially at a major league level, and God forbid something mentally happens, hitters start timing up a 99-mile-per-hour fastball and they clock him at the beginning of a season right when he gets in and he loses a bit of confidence or a little bit of dog in him. I think they're going to be cautious. So I just don't see Painter breaking with the Phillies rotation. If he does, that would be really exciting. I'm really looking forward to watching his starts with Philadelphia. I just think they're just going to be cautious. I think they'll probably – I'm looking at end of May or June being called up and being a big deal and really getting more reps at Double A, maybe even getting promoted to Triple A, just to, again, see more innings at a professional level than just the couple of games we've seen him in Double A. That's just my opinion. Beat writers, I understand, are way more in tune, so we could see it. I think it's going to be cautious.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me is you look at Bailey Falter. He struggled a lot last year, but I just mentioned what he did sort of the second half of the season, and we talk a lot about pitch mix on the show. And I know you want to get T-shirts made with what is the pitch mix? What have they done to?
Not want, they're already ordered.
It's on your credit card. It's not on my credit card. But if you look at what he did last year, and again, we'll go back to Savant and just to show people, so you can change these filters by season, and then you can change it to look at what he did on a month-by-month basis. And what you can see is there was a big change that happened here in the middle of the year that changed how he approached the last couple months of the season, which is when he went from being a liability on the mound to being a guy that looked like a very serviceable back end of the rotation starter. You can see the increased usage of the fastball and the curveball. This was even more paramount against right-handed batters, which you can see here, where that fastball and the curveball really became the top two pitches that he was throwing. Did a pretty good job, especially the curveball late in the season, right in September, held right-handed batters to a 125 batting average. So there's reasons to believe that the changes that Falter made are sustainable. And again, he's a young pitcher, so there's opportunities for him to just get better organically and naturally throughout his development process. So for me, if Falter's not in the rotation, you're sending a quality arm back to the minor leagues for a guy who's he's young, and like we just talked about, like it's hard to imagine Andrew Painter being in the rotation for a 162 game season uninhibited. So Falter's going to have to be at the big league level at some point this year. In my mind, it makes sense to start the season with Falter in the rotation. If he ends up going to the bullpen later in the year, we saw him do that last year, and he was relatively successful with it. If Painter comes up and Painter works with the bullpen like we've seen with other organizations like Seattle last year with some of their young talent, it's a way to shield them from having to go through lineup multiple times. It's a way to shield them from having to monitor their pitches and their innings as they get deeper into a season. So everything logically makes sense with Falter coming out of camp with that fifth spot, but it would not surprise me in the slightest if Dombrowski made a huge we're trying to win from day one move and they have Andrew Painter in the rotation, because Painter is the better pitcher. I don't think there's any doubt right now, even though he's only 19 going on 20, he's better than Falter. There's just other considerations, other factors that are part of this equation that give Falter a leg up from my perspective.
Awesome. Let's move on. Let's go, your favorite subject. You're the bullpen guy. So let's move on to let's move on to Phillies bullpen. In a couple years past, they've really struggled in their bullpen. It's been one of their Achilles heels. This year, though, they added 3 guys. They add Craig Kimbrell in free agency. They add Matt Strahm in free agency, and they also trade for Gregory Soto. And on top of that, you got guys like Dominguez, who really exploded onto the scene last season. And you still got Alvarado in that bullpen. What do you make of the Phillies bullpen? And not only what do you make of the Phillies bullpen, but how do you think they stack up to the Braves and the Mets, which we've already kind of talked about, as the Braves maybe being an elite bullpen and the Mets just having a bunch of, reliable and crafty veterans shooting for them, plus one of the best relievers in baseball.
First and foremost, when you're looking at the Phillies bullpen, you have to understand they're not going to have a traditional closer. Rob Thompson has been incredibly vocal about this during the preseason, because anytime you sign a guy like Craig Kimbrell with his pedigree, with his career number of saves, he's on a Hall of Fame trajectory, there's going to be the question of, well, who gets the 9th inning? And last year, one of the things that made the Phillies bullpen so successful late in the season was Thompson didn't have a quote-unquote 9th inning guy. He used guys where it was appropriate relative to the matchups and to the leverage, which, by the way, has been a well-documented fact for the last 2 decades, that managers have been misusing their bullpen by defaulting to using their best reliever in the 9th inning of games when the lead has been a margin of 3 runs or less. We've seen time and time again that managers could add more wins to their end of season total if they take a more liberal approach, like Tito Francona did with Andrew Miller in 2016 in Cleveland's run to the World Series, like we've seen only a handful of managers be bold enough to do. Thompson did a great job of that. So I think as a unit, the bullpen will be better off just because Thompson will know how to utilize these guys. But breaking it down a little bit more individually, the one guy that I think Phillies fans should finally be able to take a breath and relax about is Jose Alvarado. The fact that the Phillies signed him to an extension this offseason should tell you everything you need to know about how the Phillies feel about the changes he made last season. He got demoted after a horrible, horrible start, right? You can see early in the season was just abysmal, ended up getting sent down last May. He came back up, and after he came back up, he struck out 43% of the batters that he faced across the remainder of the regular season, to the point where we can pull up his savant here, and you can see where he ranked in a number of key metrics for the duration of the 2022 campaign. And if you didn't know that he got demoted in April, you would think that this guy was one of the best pitchers in baseball all season. The fact of the matter was he was atrocious early in the year, to the point that he got demoted. But what you saw is, and we can go down here, we can look at his pitch mix. Again, we'll go down, we'll just look at the 2022 season, and we can go month by month. Pretty much a complete reversal of what he was doing, right? So started out the season, was throwing the sinker a lot, the cutter not a lot, and wasn't terrible, but then came back and really altered this pitch mix in a way that allowed him to attack hitters a lot better. Still only a 2-pitch pitcher, but when you have elite velocity like he does, and You have incredible extension, so biomechanically very sound pitcher. This is a guy who's going to be a great and reliable member of the Philadelphia bullpen this year and for the next couple of seasons. It would the curveball. I mean, the cutter held batters to a 119 batting average, only 3 extra base hits and 87 appearances. So that's here to stay. I like Alvarado a lot. Dominguez, like you mentioned, also signed to a contract extension during the offseason. This is another guy who the Phillies were very, very high on a couple of seasons ago, ended up getting hurt, and then they had to wait for him to come back to the big leagues. And when he came back to the big leagues last year, was nothing short of sensational. Again, we'll just pull up his fan graph so that way people can take a look for themselves at the numbers. ERA of 3.36 ERA. You look at this at the Savant chart, right? K percentage, fantastic. The walk percentage, always going to be a little bit of a concern with guys that have elite movement on their pitches, but the velocity is elite. The spin rates are phenomenal. Gets a lot of swings and misses with this pitch. So Dominguez and Alvarado at the back end of this pen should be great for Thompson to utilize. Craig Kimbrell is a guy that I think will also benefit a lot from moving over to the Philadelphia organization. Kimbrell, he mentioned when he was introduced to the team a couple of months ago, or introduced to the media a couple of months ago as a member of the Phillies, that one of the things that sold him on coming to Philadelphia was that the front office sat down and explained to him how they plan to utilize biomechanics and the advanced analytics to regain some of what he lost during his tenure with the Dodgers, to the point where the guy was left off of the postseason roster. And if you look at what Kimbrell did, you can pull up his splits from last season. It's not like he went from being an elite back into the bullpen type of guy to someone that was unpitchable. The main problem that he had was this defaulting of Dave Roberts trying to use him in the ninth inning all the time, which put him in situations that weren't always advantageous for him. We can take a look at his splits, righties and lefties here. He was still elite against right-handed batters, right? 244 FIP, K percentage north of 30, like the walk rate, like we just talked about with the other two guys at the back end of this bullpen. Always going to be a concern with guys that have elite movement, but the fact that he can strike so many guys out to get himself out of jams makes that a little bit more palatable. The real problem that Kimbrell had last year was facing too many lefties late in games. Teams would pinch hit lefties against Kimbrell when he was in the game, and he really struggled. So being able to utilize Kimbrell in a more advantageous role where he's not just going to default into the ninth inning and potentially see 2 or 3 lefties, Thompson will utilize him likely more against right-handed batters, which should help him have a really successful season. And then you go down the rest of this roster, and there's a lot of other things to like Andrew Bellotti. Matt Strahm, I think, is going to be the underrated signing of the offseason. This was a guy that the Phillies were incredibly excited to have. And then the opportunity to go get Gregory Soto opened up. So now they have 2 of the hardest throwing left-handed pitchers in all of baseball in the back end of their bullpen. Connor Brogdon made a slight mechanical adjustment during the postseason, which ended up paying major dividends. He struck out 13 of the final 28 batters that he saw last year. So from the 6th inning on, Philadelphia has no shortage of elite arms to go to. I think it really says a lot that Gregory Soto might be the worst of these options. Gregory Soto lost a lot of movement on his slider last year. The velocity's gone down. The command is probably the worst out of any of these guys in the relief corps for the Phillies. So there's a lot of depth here. I trust Rob Thompson to push the right buttons at the right time. You asked me how they stack up against the Braves.
That was my next question. So brass tacks.
I didn't forget.
When you put them up against the other bullpens, and we'll open it up, not just the Mets and the Braves, but let's open it up to the Marlins, who made some acquisitions in their bullpen. You know, where do you see the Phillies lining up in this division?
Second. So I have the Braves number 1. I have the Phillies number 2. I have the Mets number 3. I have the Marlins number 4. And
the Nationals at 18.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I don't know how to – it's not fair to rank the Nationals only 1 spot lower than the Marlins and only 2 spots lower than the Mets. There's just such a tremendous gap in talent there. But this is a bullpen that they have a lot more talent than they did last year. They have a manager who understands how to utilize relievers a lot better than Girardi did, which people don't realize, right? They look at the Bryce Harpers, they look at the Trea Turners, they look at like just the guys in the lineup, they look at the starting rotation, and they think this is what wins games. But in reality, it's a lot more of the little things. It's a lot more of the base running. It's a lot more of the defense. It's a lot more of when to utilize relief pitchers. That's what ultimately ends up making a team a 95 win team versus an 85 win team at the end of the year.
And really is telling of who are the best managers in baseball and who lags behind and who's buying on the reputation, right? So like that, which is what we saw like in Chicago, for example, right? And with the White Sox, like who just buys off the Hall of Fame reputation and who are the actual like tacticians that are able to manage their bullpens at an expert level. And I think I believe in Rob Thompson enough to be encouraged going into, again, it's only his first season as a head coach in 2022. So I don't want to throw
quite away. A debut though. Quite a debut.
No, it absolutely was. I think I'm excited to see him go into 2023. I think the bullpen will be a telltale sign of how Thompson adjusts to being, the guy who's wearing the big pants instead of just being that side coach who takes over a team in distress at the last season,
Could not agree more. It'll be the litmus test, but I expect Thompson to pass with flying colors, and especially with Harper being out of the lineup for the first couple months of the season, you're going to need your manager to do what he can to push the right buttons to put your team in a position to win games. But let's transition to the offensive side of this roster and look at what we're dealing with here, right? So again, we mentioned in other videos, if you're unfamiliar with the rule changes that Major League Baseball has instituted this offseason, there's quite a few that are quite a few things that are happening new in 2023. I can pull up the rule changes just to refresh people's memories here. So first and foremost, you're gonna have this pitch timer, which pertains mostly to the pitchers, right? They have 15 seconds to get rid of the baseball with nobody on base, 20 seconds with runners on base. But what this means for hitters as well is they have to be ready to go with 8 seconds left on this clock. So not an insignificant rule change for both hitters and pitchers. More significant for hitters is the shift is now restricted. So no longer will you see 3 guys on one side of the infield. No longer will you see these really maybe confusing to the average baseball fan defensive shifts and positioning. You have to have 2 guys on each side of the diamond going into 2023. All 4 infielders must have both feet within the infield when the pitcher's on the rubber, so you won't see the second baseman all the way out in right field this season. The third, and for the Phillies, maybe the most important of these rule changes, is the bigger bases, which are going to reduce the distance from home to first by 3 inches, and then the distance between first and second and third by 4.5 inches. 4.5 inches. So a lot of things happening that are different. How are the Phillies positioned to deal with some of these rule changes? And let's start with JT Realmuto coming off of his best season as a professional. According to Fangraphs WAR, it was the 7th best season by a catcher in his 30s in the history of Major League Baseball last season. And that was after the fact that he had only a 240 batting average and a 666 OPS from opening day until June 22nd. So he did most of that during the last 3 months of the season. What are you expecting from JT in 2023? Can he continue to produce at an elite level for the Phillies?
I think so, and I think on both sides of the ball. So I'm deeming 2023 the year of the catcher for a lot of these close divisions, and God bless the Phillies that they have the best defensive catcher in baseball. And I don't think it's even close. And you can pull up Savant so we can show people kind of what we were talking about in our meeting prep. And the guy leads the entire major leagues in pop time. And not only that, but he's done that for, what was it, Nick, the last 5 seasons that he hasn't been surpassed, right? So his ability to get the ball from home plate to second base and just, oh my Lord, I can't get over the fact when you have a catcher who is dynamic both defensively and offensively, they're usually viewed as such a liability to a team. And when you have a catcher that can produce like this, like there's reasons why Hall of Fame gets thrown around with the guys who produce numbers, even if it's for a short period of time. It's like Buster Posey is a good example of that, right? Like everyone's putting Buster Posey in the Hall of Fame conversation, but when you look at the totality of his numbers, does he merit that? Maybe, maybe not. I think the same conversations will be about JT Realmuto, where it's like you cannot debate that he was the best defensive catcher in his time. And then on top of that, like if I read you, I'm going to read you off the stats offensively. If I read you stats of 22 home runs with an 820 OPS and a 46.7 hard hit percentage, Would you, in your first instinct, if I just read those stats off to you, would you think that's a catcher who's producing those numbers? Because I know I wouldn't. Like I would default to, well, that's got to be an outfielder somewhere. That's got to be someone
Or a middle infielder, second baseman, or shortstop.
just definitely not a catcher. So the fact that you have a catcher who's producing so much offensively, and he's the best defensive catcher in baseball, it's a huge uptick for Philadelphia, especially in this season. But you know what I also love about JT Realmuto that I think goes under the radar? The dude can be like great on the base paths. Like he stole 22 bases in 21 bases, 21 bases in 2022. He was in the 86th percentile in sprint speed. Like, so not only is he going to be dynamic for them throwing guys out for stealing bases, but then in turn, when he's on the base paths, you might actually see him like really being an asset to Philadelphia. So the only thing I don't like about JT Realmuto is he still tends to swing at things outside of the zone. You know, he's got an outside the zone swing percentage at 35%. That is not something we would love to see. I would wish he'd be a little bit more disciplined. Very low walk percentage in comparison with the average hitter in the league. But I think, again, he's a catcher, though. So that doesn't really mean a lot to me when he's putting up so many positive offensive numbers that I can kind of look over the negative offensive numbers that come into play. So JT Realmuto, for all Phillies fans going into 2023, take a deep breath because, you know, in a division where I said it in the Atlanta Braves video about Sean Murphy, in a division that I think that's going to be incredibly close this year, it's going to be up to guys like Sean Murphy and JT Realmuto, who will be the difference of making sure that guy, you know, is not stealing all over their starting pitchers and putting more guys into scoring position. And then not only that, but when they switch over to the other side of the ball and able to be a very productive member of the lineup. And Sean Murphy's a productive member, but JT Realmuto is arguably like a fantastic all-star caliber offensive player. You know, Sean Murphy is good, but I would argue JT Realmuto is great. So Philly has the best catcher in baseball, in my opinion, for sure the best catcher in their division. And I think that gives them a leg up going into all these new rule changes.
Realmuto is 150 to 1 to win the NL MVP this season. He's coming off of a 7th place finish in last year's MVP voting, despite the fact that, again, he did pretty much all of his damage after June 22nd. Any reason to invest in him in that market?
I was going to ask, for the first time, can we do a Google search real quick with everybody? Has there ever been a catcher that has won the MVP award? Like pull that up on the big screen, and let's all do that Google search together. Because
as a catcher won MVP in Major League,
because there have been some great catchers, like Johnny
Bench. Buster Posey, Joe Mauer. I'm embarrassed that I even forgot those two. Joe Mauer was on the cover of MLB The Show. I can't remember. He's in the division. I remember I hated the guy growing up because he killed Cleveland. So I can't. Was
Buster Posey the most recent? What was that? 20? I can't see this.
2012. Yep.
2012. Okay. Yep. So could it be possible? Sure. But in my opinion, you have to have some. He's got great offensive numbers. I would argue he doesn't have elite offensive numbers, right? So I would say no, tentatively, because I know that MVP voters don't give a lick about defense. Like we said in the Mets video, I think they care about it when all else is equal between two offensive players, and you know it's a coin flip on their stats, so they'll look at the defense maybe to swing the vote one way or the other. I don't think JT Realmuto will benefit from that because I don't think that his offensive stats will match some of the guys like we've been talking about. So let's say like Pete Alonso has the season that we think he's going to have, where he's just going to hit bombs. He's going to be 50 plus home runs, hit for average, you know, just great offensive season. Like Realmuto won't even be mentioned, I think, if that happens in a Pete Alonso situation. And if it's not Pete Alonso, I think it will be somebody in the National League. The National League is filled with quality talent. So no, I don't think he breaks into the MVP conversation, but if there's an MVP of Philly that might be the reason of why they get far this season, I think Realmuto could be in the conversation with fans, like a fun fan conversation of like, who's our most valuable guy who takes us over the hump to get back to a World Series appearance. I think a lot of fans could argue it's JT and the leadership that he provides on the field and what he does on both sides.
Yeah, just to bring up the voting from last season, my thoughts on this, JT Realmuto just won't be able to play enough games to win this award. I think last season was his peak season, right? He was, even though he didn't have a great start to the year, his end of season numbers were, I think, about as good as it's going to get for JT Realmuto, especially as he continues to age. And the fact that he still only played 139 games, which was still far more than the vast majority of catchers in Major League Baseball, I don't think he's ever going to be able to do enough to warrant getting all the way up to, where Goldschmidt and Machado and Arenado were in the voting last year. He's going to be a guy that I think is definitely mispriced on the MVP market at 150-1. I think that's ludicrous for a guy who finished 7th last year, only having half of a good season. But there's a lot of things working against him. The average, the power, the amount of games that he can play, because as a catcher, you're just going to need some days off. So I'm in agreement with you. I think Realmuto is an incredibly important player. Like you mentioned, the best pop time in Major League Baseball 5 years in a row. The last time he didn't finish number 1 in that metric, he was number 2 in that metric. He's never finished worse than 3rd in pop time since he entered the league all the way back in 2015. So love JT Realmuto, not investing in him to win MVP. One guy, though, I would be interested to get your thoughts in. Let's move to first base. Rhys Hoskins is 80-1 to win NL MVP. And contrary to popular belief, I think a lot of people look at Rhys Hoskins and they think this guy's been a failure, a disappointment, et cetera, et cetera. He did it to himself, right? He was so good when he burst onto the scene back as a rookie, hitting 18 home runs in 50 games with a 17.5% walk rate. The guy set the bar here, right? Like, you can't even see the bar. He set it so high. Since then, he's just simply been very, very good year in and year out. He does have a tendency to go through slumps throughout the season, and then he gets red hot. But if you look at his end of the year numbers, year in and year out, the guy is always an incredibly productive hitter over the course of 162 games. What do you make of him as he fits into this Philadelphia lineup going into 2023? And is there potentially more in the tank? Could we see him maybe get back to some semblance of what he did in that 50-game debut, which could potentially catapult him into this MVP conversation?
We could see it. I think that one thing I really like is how many pitches he sees in at bat. So he's pretty high up that in that average. He sees about 4.31 pitches per plate appearance. And we can maybe pull that data up for people to take a look at in comparison to the league, right? So I do like that about him. I do like that he is a solid power hitter who can get you 30 home runs like last season. I also enjoy the fact that I enjoy watching it at first base because he kind of looks lost at playing any kind of defense. What we consistently see with Philly is, they are one of the best offensive teams, I think, in baseball. God, are they just horrendous at defense, and Rhys Hoskins doesn't see any of that. So could he see the increase of offensive potential? Yeah, sure. I don't love the fact that his K rate sits at 25.1%. But he's also swinging. He's not swinging at pitches outside of the zone, and his outside of the zone percentage is at 25%, which shows me a pretty disciplined hitter when he's actually swinging at pitches. He's not chasing things like Javi Baez or his teammate Nick Castellanos, which we'll talk about, right? So I think he's got some metrics that show that he can be a disciplined hitter. And I mean, we talk about expectations in other videos, right? If what I'm getting out of Rhys Hoskins is someone who is going to be a consistent guy, durable guy, who's going to hit me 30 home runs, and when he's hot, he's one of the hottest players in baseball. And when he's not hot, it's a first baseman, who doesn't hurt us because we have so much more talent on this squad.
Mm-hmm.
I'm content with that. And as long as he's not hurting the team, which I would argue he isn't, because again,
He's so many pitches. He's never an easy at bat. No, even if he's not producing high-end stats, even during his slumps, he makes pitchers work to get him out, which I think is an underrated part of being a big league hitter.
Right. So I don't think that, I don't think I'll mention Hoskins in any kind of way on an MVP conversation, but in terms of someone who's just going to be fun and you're content to have in your lineup, and he will do good things for you when he is hot, and when he isn't, then, we'll all kind of like joke about it on the side and just be like, classic Rhys. He's not, you can't hit the side of a barn this month, right? So I can't wait till he gets back into it. He doesn't hit the ground. He doesn't hit the ball into the ground that much. He doesn't have metrics that just like, this guy hurts the Phillies. Now, does he like make them into an all-time contender? No, but he makes them dynamic where you throw him in a part of the lineup, he'll eat pitches from good pitchers, that allows the guys to get a little bit more relaxed and see better pitches from those opposing pitchers.
He allows the guys behind him in the lineup to see
better
what the pitcher
pitches
has to offer, right?
And that was a sloppy way of me putting that, but you get my point, right? So he just allows guys to get a little bit more relaxed behind him and then drive those pitch counts up for great opposing pitchers, right? So I think a good piece for Philly. I'm looking forward to see him in 2023, but I don't think any Philly fan should just like hang all your hopes on if Rhys Hoskins is going to go back to like an MVP caliber performance.
Yeah, I agree with you. You can look at a Savant chart, right? There's some concerning things that right off the bat would make him less likely to win an MVP candidate, right? The batting average, it's an antiquated stat, right? It's not the most important metric in the world anymore, but it still gets held against guys in the MVP conversation. The K percentage as well, as you mentioned, it's not great, right? Guys who win MVP awards typically don't strike out at the rate that Rhys Hoskins does. The main thing that keeps me from wanting to invest in Hoskins in the futures market, even at a price that may seem enticing, is the fact that he does a disproportionate amount of his damage against left-handed pitching. You can see last season, Rhys Hoskins, we'll scroll down to his advanced stats here. Against lefties, right, 945 OPS, runs created plus 162. So this is indexed to 100, meaning that for every number above 100, that this number is, you're 1% better than the league average hitter. So he was 62% better against left-handed pitching, only 8% better against right-handed pitching. In Major League Baseball, the vast majority of pitchers that you will see throughout the course of a regular season are right-handed. So this is a limiting factor for me where I think Rhys Hoskins' upside is capped a little bit. The other thing that is working against Rhys Hoskins, we'll go back to his batted ball metrics here. You mentioned he doesn't hit the ball on the ground a ton, but he did go in the wrong direction last season, hitting the ball on the ground about 6% more often than he did the year prior. Those are two things that don't scream breakout candidate for a number of reasons.
So the only thing, though, that we were remiss to mention, he is in a contract year. He's unrestricted free agent going into 2024. So, they paid him $12 million going into 2023. But he is on the same list as Aaron Nola for Dombrowski to make a decision on whether or not you're going to pay this guy. And there are plenty of teams that I think would pay him a ton of money to get these numbers in their lineup. I'm thinking like Baltimore, when we're going to talk about Baltimore over the weekend, but a team like that where he's 31 years old, you sign a veteran to a nice contract. He's got some great numbers that can really coincide with some young hitters that you have in your lineup. So I think Philly will have to decide, what you're going to pay him. And if I will say this, if Hoskins does have a season where, he has some of his best numbers, I think that would be scary for me as a Philly fan because his numbers have been good, but not great. So you don't want to lose him, but also you don't want to overpay him to get him to stay. So
it doesn't scare me as a Phillies fan. If Rhys Hoskins has a career year, you're probably making a deep postseason run. And if he walks, he walks, but
no, not on the walks. It's if Dombrowski has to sit down and pay him, an 8-year contract until Rhys Hoskins is 38.
Yeah, but I don't think Dombrowski's doing that for a guy that ends up getting overpaid relative to what he's done. I mean, he is what he is, right? He's a near lock for 25, 30 home runs, a 10% walk rate. But what you're looking at is a guy who's unlikely to hit 40 or 45 home runs for reasons that we've seen hold consistent year over year, right? Too many strikeouts, the ground ball rate going in the wrong direction. You need to hit more home runs. You need to hit the ball in the air more, right? Not less. So it's something that's correctable, but Rhys Hoskins going in the wrong direction doesn't warrant me investing in him at 80-1 preseason. I probably won't look at him at all until June, July, right? He would have to be a guy that would be a hedge opportunity for me. If, like, say I had 2 of the final 4 guys that are in that final MVP conversation in the National League, Rhys Hoskins would be somebody that I would be hedging on late in the season. He's not somebody that I feel can sustain success over the course of 162 games. But it is an important point that you brought up. He's in a walk year. We've seen crazier things happen. We've seen Pablo Sandoval do some pretty impressive things in a walk year.
You just have to watch slugging first baseman who are over the age of 30, who have one great career season, and then teams pay them, an ass load of money, and then that team, it's like hot potato, gets stuck with the dud at 33 or 34 years old. And like Chris Davis comes to mind for me of watching him in Baltimore, where the same kind of situation happened for that team, and they had to sign him to an Uber deal, and they're still paying him to this day. So that's the only thing I'm going to be interested storyline going into 2023 when it comes to Hoskins. Other than the fact that, we have a good buddy that's a Philadelphia Phillies fan, and he said that when Bryce Harper comes back into the lineup, this lineup's going to be an absolute buzzsaw. And I agree with him, and I think Hoskins is a huge part of that. So,
well, let's switch over. Let's talk about a guy who's not in a contract here, a guy who just burst onto the scene. Let's talk about Bryson Stott, second baseman. He's 14th overall pick from the 2019 draft. Made his debut last year, showcased some impressive pitch recognition at the plate, some good play discipline skills, especially for a guy that is obviously still youthful, right? Just got called up, had his first taste of big league action. Among 205 hitters with at least 400 plate appearances last year, he ranked 47th in contact percentage on pitches inside the strike zone, 10th in contact percentage on pitches outside of the strike zone, making it very, very difficult to get anything by him, right? If you're an opposing pitcher. The addition of Trea Turner going to allow Stott to transition from shortstop, where he played last year and didn't play all that well, to second base, a more natural fit for him with his arm strength and with his range. He's a long shot to win MVP, right? 401. But fantasy-wise, DFS-wise, what are you expecting from Stott? Is this a guy who could maybe threaten to be an all-star? Are we going to see him follow up a relatively impressive rookie season with another high-quality output in 2023? What do you expect from this kid at second base?
Well, it's nice to see that the Phillies arguably have another glove in the infield that is not absolutely horrendous. He was 74th percentile in OAA in 2022. So I like that. I didn't learn a lot about Stott in his rookie year, so I'm not looking at him as like this massive piece for Philadelphia. I think that he'll be an interesting watch. A 295 on base percentage is not something that screams to me all-star potential. So I think he's got a lot of work to do. I do think it takes a lot of stress off him that you do bring a guy in like Trea Turner and get him over to the second base position. So maybe we'll see a little bit of an uptick, but I don't see him as being a massive piece. I also don't see him as, having this amazing sophomore season. I just think he'll be, a guy who's not going to be a complete liability in the field for Philadelphia. And he doesn't have a lot of stress. That I really like sometimes teams that are really settled in their roster, and it allows some of their young guys who do have talent, who are not a liability on the club, to kind of develop without the immediate pressure of, carrying a franchise on their back. So I think that that's in Stott's favor for Philadelphia. And there are plenty of guys who are going to be able to carry the offensive load, which allows him to kind of relax. Talk about also some guys in their lineup who he can really talk to and, get some great tips on how to be dynamic in the batter's box. But I would pump the brakes, I think, on any conversation of like all-star conversations or anything like that. I think he's just slated to be a good piece for them. And I like the fact that he is not horrendous on defense, which like opposite of Alec Bohm, where we'll talk about how just atrocious he is defensively and how he really needs to pull that around going into next season.
For me, I've seen Stott on a lot of sleeper lists, fantasy-wise and otherwise, going into 2023. He is what he is, right? Like, I'm honestly surprised that we even have MVP odds on him. I think this is just the sports books trying to take a few dollars from gullible fans who know that Stott was a former first-round pick and they think that they might be able to catch somebody sleeping here. He's a solid defender. He's going to be even better at second base than he was at shortstop. He's got elite speed. You can see on the Savant chart right here, 91st percentile in sprint speed last year, and he has extraordinary contact skills. So the Phillies don't need him to be a 25-30 home run guy. They don't need him to be a main fixture in terms of driving runs in and things of that nature in this lineup. Stott is what he is, right? He's 25 years old. He's, like any young player, has the ability to continue to get better throughout the natural trajectory of his career. But the idea of him being an all-star, you mentioned the 295 on base percentage. I don't know if it's going to continue to be that low, right, as he adjusts to major league pitching. Maybe we do see him get back up to the success that he did have in the minors, right? 375 on base percentage at AAA last year, 439 in AAA in 2021. You can see some strong numbers in the lower levels of the minor leagues as well. The contact skills give him a very, very safe floor going into 2023. This to me means there's a very low percentage chance that he's a liability to this team. I'm not investing in him whatsoever in the futures market. I'm probably not taking him in fantasy unless I can get him at a decent price in a salary league, or he falls a little bit relative to his current average draft position in a snake draft. But the Phillies will be happy to have him there. He's another young guy, team-friendly deal because he's still on his rookie deal. He's going to be in arbitration after that. So I think the Phillies will be happy with him. But yeah, I don't have anything really super interesting to add to that. I thought you summed it up pretty well.
Well, he smacks of that guy who's on those like sleeper articles in your fantasy league that, you know, one of your league members reads and picks him way too high, and you're like, why did you pick that guy? Like, oh, trust me, man, he's gonna have a huge breakout season.
No, it's like, no, I read that magazine too, and I think it was total BS. So.
That's exactly right. But you know, on the stock conversation, let's talk about his brother from another mother, Alec Bohm, over on the corner, who I think had a lot more expectations thrown at him as opposed to Stott, where Stott, like I said, like Stott has an ability, I think, to kind of take a deep breath and not have so much pressure. Bohm's the opposite. I think he's got a lot of pressure on him because he was so highly touted. He's got some metrics that I don't hate. So like, you know, K percentage is 17.4% for a guy who's only even a couple years. I think that's not bad, but a 4.9% walk rate. His swinging out of the zone is sitting at 35%. So, you know, he has a tendency, like any young hitter, to, you know, try to chase things outside the plate. You know, what do you make of Bohm? And also, he's got a horrendous glove. I mean, he's one of the worst third basemen, defensively speaking. He had some really electric plays, though, that I made a video about when it was in the postseason against Houston. So that was very interesting. But what do you make of Bohm, and how do you think he stacks up to Stott? Like, do you think Stott has a better season going into 2023, or do you think Bohm does, and people should be more excited about one or the other?
The main thing that is limiting Alec Bohm's ascension is the fact that he just can't hit fastballs, right? So in 2021, this is a great stat that Matt Gelb had in The Athletic. 224 qualified hitters in 2021. Alec Bohm was dead last in slugging percentage against fastballs. That's a problem, right? Because if you can't hit velocity in the major leagues, there's a lot of it, and major league pitchers will learn how to get it past you. Last year, he made marginal improvements. He ranked 153rd out of 229 qualified hitters in slugging percentage against fastballs. So you see him starting to get a little bit better. He makes a ton of contact, like you said. The big thing with him for me is he hits way too many baseballs into the ground, right? So you can see that he makes a decent amount of hard contact, 73rd percentile average exit velocity, 67th percentile hard hit rate. But when you look at what he does in terms of his batted ball metrics, it's incredibly problematic. And we can go over to our custom data sheet here, and we can look at how many ground balls he's hitting relative to league average. And we'll search for Alec Bohm here, and we can see where he's coming in. And you can see last year he hit 7% more ground balls than league average, that ground ball rate at 46%. So when you're hitting the ball into the ground consistently, there's only so much upside that you have, right? You mentioned that he's the number 3 overall draft pick back from 2018. His expectations were sky high when he first entered the league, and they seemingly have never fallen, right? Every year, it's just, no matter what Alec Bohm does positively, people are still disappointed with the fact that he makes a lot of really embarrassing plays on fundamental balls at third base, that he's not a great base runner, that he's not hitting 25, 30 home runs. So for me, Alec Bohm doesn't have the upside that a lot of people thought he had when he came into the league. The fact that he can't get the ball in the air at a higher clip limits any potential explosiveness that we see in the home run department. The fact that he can't hit fastballs in a league where guys are routinely hitting the mid to upper 90s is problematic. So for me, it's like Alec Bohm, I think, has another solid season, right? You go back and you look at his fan graphs, and what he did last year, I think if you're the Phillies, you take it, right? 152 games, so he's durable at third base. He hits 13 home runs, bats 280, drives in 72 runs. That's completely fine from a guy who's going to bat in the lower half of the order. I think his end of the season numbers end up being a little bit better than Bryson Stott in 2023, but the long-term situation is much better for Stott. And I think the Phillies are going to be turning their heads and being more invested in a guy like Stott, especially when you look at the third base position and some of the free agents that could be coming available on the open market in the next couple of seasons. Dombrowski is going to have a decision to make here of, are we committed to a guy who has an incredibly subpar glove, who doesn't have high-end offensive potential anymore if we don't see it in the next year or two? Or do we go out there and do we continue to add around a core that has Trea Turner and Bryce Harper, and hopefully Aaron Nola is still there and Zack Wheeler might still be under contract. So there's decisions to be made, but I think Alec Bohm is more of what we've seen the last couple of years. I don't think in his age 26 season we're all of a sudden going to see a guy hit 30 home runs that is hitting the ball on the ground at a nearly 50% clip.
Yeah, I agree. Let's round out the infield conversation here. Your boy Trea Turner signs a massive deal to leave the Dodgers and go play for Philadelphia, a position they sorely needed going into this year. A lot of people argued that was the position that Philly really they already had a World Series appearance, but if they got one of these quality shortstop free agents, it was just going to turn around the franchise in terms of not just, a flirtatious contender where it's, maybe they got hot going into the playoff, but then solidifying them every preseason as, this is a team that's going to contend for a World Series. I read so many articles before the massive free agent sweepstakes, like when guys actually started getting signed, where every marquee shortstop free agent this offseason was linked to Philadelphia. Like Xander Bogaerts, Philadelphia logo. Trea Turner, Philadelphia logo. Dansby Swanson, Philadelphia logo. Carlos Correa, Philadelphia logo. Like every article had some major guy going to Philly. So what do you make of them investing in Trea Turner in the long term as well? Like they really threw a lot of money at him and the years at him. And how does he anchor Philadelphia?
I'm biased, right? Trea Turner is my second favorite player in the league. Mookie Betts is far and away my favorite player. Trea Turner is second, and there's a huge gap after him. So take this with a grain of salt. But purely objective look at what Trea Turner brings to the Philadelphia Phillies organization. We can pull up his Savant and take a look here. 99th percentile sprint speed. I feel like Trea Turner has sort of been forgotten about a little bit these last couple of years with the Dodgers. I don't know if it's because he consistently plays at 10 o'clock East Coast time, so not a lot of people get to watch him like they did when he played with the Nationals. Also, the fact that he was in such a loaded lineup and batting behind Mookie Betts in the lineup, we saw him be a lot less aggressive on the base pass. And this is a spot, I already grabbed this, the lines moved, but he was as high as 20-1 to lead Major League Baseball in the stolen base category this season. Rob Thompson is already committed to batting Trea Turner in the leadoff position to begin this season while Bryce Harper is out. And Bryce Harper will for sure miss all of April. He will for sure miss all of May, probably be back in mid to late June or early July, depending on how that rehab process goes. In Trea Turner's career, 472 games batting first in the lineup, he has stolen 0.33 bases per game. Now, I know that's a little bit of an uncomfortable stat to make sense of off the top of your head, but in relative terms, when he's batted second in the lineup, which he did primarily with the Dodgers the last couple of years, he's averaged only 0.2 stolen bases per game. So what that means is he's averaging significantly more stolen bases per game out of the leadoff spot than he is batting lower in the lineup. And when you think about this logically, this makes a ton of sense, right? When you're batting behind a high on-base percentage guy like Mookie Betts, if Mookie Betts walks to start a game, if he singles to start a game, if he doubles to start a game, there's a decent shot that Trea Turner, even if he gets on base, is blocked on the base pass by the guy that's batting in front of him in the order.
Absolutely.
There's the added component of when you have a lineup as loaded as the Dodgers did with Freddie Freeman and Max Muncy and Will Smith and Gavin Lux and Justin Turner and all these megastars behind you, Dave Roberts wasn't the most aggressive manager on the base pass. And it's hard to fault him, right? If Freddie Freeman, who has one of the highest line drive percentages in baseball, hits a ball in the gap and Trea Turner's on first base, Trea Turner's going to score from first. You don't need to be on second base. Thompson, though, much, much more aggressive as a manager on the base pass. Last year, the Phillies ranked 5th in all of baseball in stolen bases for the season. And Thompson wasn't even the manager for 162 games. Turner batting in the leadoff spot, I think it's crazy value for that particular prop, the 20-1 to lead the league in stolen bases. If it's fallen a little bit, it's 14-1 now over at DraftKings. I would still take it at that number. From a fantasy perspective, Trea Turner is unquestionably a first-round pick in my mind. If your league provides extra value or extra points for stolen bases, or if you're in a roto league, I think he has even more value. From a pure baseball perspective, the Philadelphia Phillies are getting one of the best players in baseball at a position that is incredibly important on the diamond. Defensively, at shortstop, Trea Turner has had seasons where he has looked like a gold glove talent there. Last year, he was about league average, which you can see outs above average is the gold standard for defensive metrics. But in his career, 78th percentile in 2021, really bad in 2020, but that was the COVID season, right? So there's thoughts that if this is 162 games, that he probably improves on that metric. 2019, 87th percentile, right? So he has high-end potential with the glove. The bat is as good, if not better, than any shortstop in the league. He has underrated pop for a guy that is often thought of as just a speedster. The Phillies should be incredibly excited about having this guy in there, not just for 2023, but for the next decade. It allows the offense to do a lot more in terms of hit and runs, especially now with the shift being restricted to having two guys on each side of the infield. He's gonna make a huge impact for this team.
Yeah, and he's played a lot of games. So he also is a guy who hasn't dealt with a lot of major injuries and been a stalwart in lineups when he was with Washington, when he went over to LA. And I think you'll see that in Philadelphia. It's hard to imagine a player who's like, if you get into, it's hard to talk about GOAT conversations in baseball, obviously, because there's so many different things. I can't think of a player who's just better all around than Trea Turner. Like, just in every facet of the game, he just
Mookie Betts.
Well, okay, slow down
By a lot.
So, I think that Trea Turner is just one of those guys. He plays one of the most demanding defensive positions in baseball, and he can do it at a great level. He's dynamic on the base paths. He doesn't need to be your guy on the base paths, and we saw that in LA. He can hit for power. He can hit just for regular contact, one of the more disciplined hitters in the league. He's just such an exciting player, and he's been there before, which I also think is important for Philadelphia. A lot of these guys who were in the free agency sweepstakes, a lot of them had been to the dance. Alexander Bogaerts has been there and has won. Carlos Correa was there and won. Dansby Swanson was there and won. And same with Trea Turner. And I think that's why, Philly was so aggressive on going after these guys. They have a young squad in terms of some of the, again, like Stott and Bohm that we've discussed. When you add a guy like Trea Turner into your clubhouse who's got a glowing reputation and you sign him to a long-term deal and he's been all over the place and he understands how to be part of a winning ball club, that's just a huge get for them. So I really like the signing for Philly. I think that was probably my number one shortstop in this free agency class. I think a lot of people had that down as the number one shortstop. A little concerning on how long his contract is. I mean, he's going to be 40 years old at the time this contract is over.
Invest in the sports science, right? Yeah. Keep him healthy. Keep him.
Yeah, maybe he looks like Ozzie Smith at the end of his career. I mean, Ozzie Smith played all the way until he was about 40 years old. So, I'm not saying that's a knock on it at all. It's just that, it's a reality that they're going to have to face. But for the years that you have him in his prime, which is probably the next 3 or 4 years, great signing by Philadelphia. Absolutely great.
Let's talk about.
Go ahead. No, you first. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say let's transition though to the guy he's gonna supplant in that leadoff spot. So last year, Kyle Schwarber batted leadoff 123 times as a member of the Phillies. What we saw happen with Schwarber batting leadoff for the first time in his career, saw a career high number of fastballs in 0-0 counts. He saw the most first pitch strikes of his career. What did it lead to? 46 home runs, 100 RBIs. Both of those were career best. Schwarber now being, I don't want to say demoted to the 2 spot, but moved down to the 2 spot in the order, at least until Harper gets back here in a couple of months. What impact does this have on Schwarber? He's 40-1 to win the MVP, which seems a little bit crazy considering the numbers that he put up last year, and some of the expected stats argued that he should have performed even better than he did. What do you make of him at 40-1 to win MVP? And are you concerned at all with him hitting in a different position in the lineup? Is that going to have a negative impact on the numbers relative to what we saw last year?
That will be interesting to look at because he saw a lot more fastballs, right, leading off than he arguably will when he's not leading off. Some stats that just really hit home for me. So like his fly ball percentage, 51%. The guy puts the ball in the air a crazy amount. Makes sense since he hit 46 home runs last year. Hard hit percentage, 54.4%. So the guy just hits. I think he's also third behind Judge and Yordan Alvarez for hardest hit baseball. And he barrels the ball 20.1%. So the guy, when he's making contact with the ball, like the seams come out of the baseball. So I think that's a great thing for Philadelphia. What's also really funny is that he's got a 12.9% walk rate, which is great for hitters, especially hitters like his profile, like big power hitters. Like they don't tend to walk very much. They tend to be like home run or bust guys who strike out a lot. And like weirdly enough, he does. He's got a 29.9% strikeout rate, which is horrendous. Like we would look at that in a young player and be like, something needs to change about his swing. But his outside the zone swing percentage is only 25%. So that tells me again, he's not chasing, paper cups that fly all the way outside of the strike zone. What he does is he strikes out so much because he's trying to hit the ball so hard on every single pitch that he's just literally swinging right through balls in the strike zone. And I really hope someone sits him down, someone on the Philadelphia coaching staff, and just says, dude, you do not need to go up there and swing for the fences on every single pitch. Because if this guy, he had a BABIP of 240. I mean, if he just puts more balls into play and just becomes a little bit more disciplined hitter in terms of just, again, not swinging for the fences on every pitch, I like him for a sleeper MVP candidate. Like he already was putting up numbers last season that like MVP voters love, which is the home run totals, and all those metrics that I had just mentioned before. So I kind of like Kyle Schwarber if he makes that adjustment where you don't see a 29.9% K rate. Cause I think he would be he's already feared by major league pitchers, but he would be even more feared because of the walk rate and his swinging percentages where it shows that he can be a disciplined hitter. He's going out there and he's trying to hit the ball in a Tokyo Bay every single time. So I hope he makes that adjustment. But if he does, I like Kyle Schwarber actually on the MVP conversation. He could be a huge piece to Philadelphia this season.
I'll tell you what, I hope he does not make an adjustment. I want to see Kyle Schwarber ripping the seams out of the baseball when he does make contact. I'll let him strike out 30% of the time if he's hitting me 40 home runs. MVP conversation for me, it's a no-go. You can see only one season where he's batted above 250. And if you look at the awards voting from last year, and this holds consistent pretty much year over year, the guys who finished in the top 9 in MVP voting, right? You can see 317, 298, 293. Mookie Betts is really the only outlier in here, batting 269. But Betts' contributions with the glove, in addition to his base running leadership, batting leadoff at the top of the Dodgers lineup, which was the best lineup in all of baseball last year, I think made him a little bit of an exception to the rule here. And still, he batted 269, a number that Schwarber has not sniffed in his career. But man, I mean, there's a lot to like outside of the defense with Schwarber. I think whether he bats first when Harper comes back or continues to bat second throughout the year, you mentioned that he hits the ball in the air a ton. We can go look again. We'll bring back our custom data sheet, and you can see that among qualified hitters, he led the league in fly ball percentage. I'll pull this over just a little bit more so everyone can see. Trout was ahead of him. Joey Gallo was ahead of him. Cal Riley was ahead of them. But 502 plate appearances you needed to be a qualified hitter. So Schwarber technically led the league in this category at 51.1%. The big thing for me is like Schwarber, you would like to see him put the ball in play a little bit more. It's probably not going to happen. It's probably not what the Phillies need. They have enough guys in the lineup, like we talked about with Alec Bohm, with Trea Turner, with Bryson Stott, that play that more of a small ball role for them. Bryce Harper is another guy that when he comes back, he very capable hitter, both contact and with power. So I would be shocked to see Schwarber make that adjustment unless you've personally had a conversation with Schwarber and you're telling him that you're betting him 40-1 to win MVP and that you need to see a higher batting average out of him. But regardless, there's a lot to like here. The Phillies will be very, very happy to have him with a ball club for another year. I don't know if he hits another 45, 50 home runs, but if he hits 35 home runs and drives in another 100 RBIs, that's a win with Kyle Schwarber, especially for what you're paying that guy.
So he's horrendous in the outfield. What do you think are the odds that he moves over to a DH role and Philly goes out and, signs a profar, gets active in the trade market, or even goes to their prospects, right? So like I was just looking up their prospect list. They got Justin Crawford as their 4th prospect. He's an outfielder, but he's not ETA'd until 2026. Their 6th best prospect is Johan Rojas. He's played some AA ball. He's expected in 2023, which usually when you look at MLB.com prospect pipelines and they do like an ETA, it's rarely ever 100% correct. I always add an additional year. So if a player is scheduled to go up 2023, unless you see them on the active roster, I always add an additional year. So do you think that Philly looks at Schwarber? Let's say he doesn't make the adjustment. It's just that those pure power hitting numbers, but he can actually do well in driving up pitch counts. We got to get him out of the outfield because he's just a complete defensive liability. Do you see them making a move early? Do you see them going out and spending more money? We know the owner is willing to spend. What do you think they do in that situation?
I think it depends on the health of Bryce Harper. Last year, Harper had a DH, right? Because he couldn't play the field.
He couldn't play the field.
Yeah,
he plays right field for them when he is healthy.
Right, but I just mean in terms of outfield depth, right? It's Castellanos is far from a good option in the outfield. Schwarber's not a good option in the outfield. Even Bryce Harper, he's an electric player. He's fun to watch, but not an elite defensive player. So you're not really in a great spot no matter what you do if you're Philadelphia. I do think one interesting note to make, and we can talk about this guy really briefly here because he's not a focal point of the team, but Edmundo Sosa, who they brought over last year, can play outfield. And if you pull up his savant chart, the guy's crazy athletic, 96 percentile sprint speed. He played more infield than he did outfield last season, but he did play a little bit in left field. 97th percentile defensive efficiency. Hard to imagine that a guy like him would be a downgrade over Schwarber. So even in the early portion of the season, I wouldn't be surprised to see a guy like Sosa get a little bit more playing time, and maybe Schwarber or Castellanos does see some time at DH to try to limit their exposure. Because it's tough, right? So, we can go look at the center field position, and Brandon Marsh is about as good as it gets defensively in the middle of that outfield. But some major concerns with him with the bat, right? Especially against left-handed pitching in 2022, had a 188 batting average, only 3 extra base hits, struck out over 40% of the time. Those are unplayable numbers, if we're being frank. And the Phillies are committing to him as an everyday player this year. It's tough to have 3 outfield spots in the absence of Bryce Harper that are major liabilities either defensively or at the plate in certain situations. I would not be surprised to see Dombrowski go be aggressive with some of this younger talent that they have in the pipeline. The pitching prospects that we mentioned earlier, that they have 2 guys. Painter is definitely off limits, but the 2 guys that they have also ranked in the top 51 in Baseball Prospectus' top 101 list. I think those 2 guys could be moved. I think some of the guys that you just mentioned on the hitter side of the prospect list are also candidates that could be used as bargaining chips to go get an outfielder that becomes available later this summer. They're going to need to. Philadelphia, they made it to the World Series last year, despite the fact that they were atrocious defensively. This is a team that has the starting pitching. They have the bullpen. They have the manager. They have everything that you could want and need for a team that wants to contend for a World Series. But people really, really underestimate how important defense is to winning championships and just to winning games in general, right? The Philadelphia Phillies are a much better version of the Chicago White Sox, who also have a ton of raw talent, but are an incredibly poor fundamental baseball team. And we saw what happened to the White Sox last year. So just because the Phillies went to the World Series last year, there's a reason that their win total is sitting at 88.5 in 2023. And it doesn't have everything to do with Bryce Harper. People are aware of how deficient they are at first base, at third base, at left field, and in right field this season. So I don't think that's a crazy scenario that we see Philadelphia go out and try to upgrade their outfield position in some way, assuming Harper is healthy and will be able to play right field when he comes back.
I would agree, my friend. So, we talk about promise with Kyle Schwarber. Why don't we move on to the guy who really underperformed on the contract that they brought him in on? Let's go talk about Nick Castellanos and just what the hell happened. It's just, he puts up a season in 2021 for Cincinnati where he was garnering MVP votes. Now he wound up 12th in MVP voting, but his offensive statistics in 2021 were amazing. 34 home runs, 362 on base percentage, 576 slug. He was hitting hard hit contact 46.9%. He's always been an undisciplined hitter in terms of chasing things out of the zone, but to go from hitting a 576 slug to going to 389 in 2022, to hit 34 home runs and then hit 13 and no significant injuries. He had a little bit of a wrist issue going into May, right, where he got hit in the wrist, but all the things came back negative. He didn't break it or anything like that. And it's not like in Cincinnati, it was like a one season wonder. And he was an offensive stud for them in Detroit. He has history of being a fantastic hitter. For some reason, it's just like he got the yips last year. Like that's what it really looks like to me. So, I think I wrote down a quote from Dombrowski that he made at the end of last season. He said, I think one of his biggest problems, him being Castellanos, is he's always been in a situation where he's not a strike zone hitter. This year, he was even worse in that regard. By the way, love that Dombrowski looks at that kind of stuff. It kind of backs up what we said in our past video about the Braves when we kind of look at like the outside the zone swinging percentage, your contact rate in the zone, all that stuff being important to these analytical departments and ball clubs, and it goes all the way up to the president of the club. What happened though to Castellanos? What would be your diagnosis when you look at what happened in 2022?
It's a few things, right? So number one, Philadelphia fans found out that he bought a new home in South Jersey, which is just about the worst thing that a Philadelphia baseball player could have leaked to the media. And Castellanos admitted that it weighed on him mentally, right? You try as hard as you can to separate your job and to separate the batter's box from your real life. But the fact that leaked out, that a lot of people were criticizing him for that, he said weighed on him. He used a quote to one of the beat writers, Todd Zalecki, that he said baseball wasn't fun last year. And he's really focused on making last year about last year, moving on, forgetting about, his worst season that he's had since 2015, excluding that pandemic year. The one thing that makes me a little bit less optimistic than maybe Castellanos is in himself is the fact that there were really tangible reasons beyond the psychological that Castellanos struggled last year. And we can bring up a savant here and you can see this was his 2022 numbers, and you can see a lot of blue, which is not very good. 2021, a lot of red, which you mentioned, right? This is what got him the big contract. But even in that big year, he's, like you said, chasing a lot of pitches outside the strike zone, not walking a ton, swinging through a lot of pitches, not good defensively. So there were things not to like, but you invest in the hard exit velocities and the barrel percentage and all of that. The big thing that happened in 2022, which you can forgive Dombrowski for not preparing for this or not anticipating this, is the league threw Nick Castellanos a career high number of breaking balls. Specifically, they threw him a career high number of sliders, a pitch that he has struggled against mightily throughout his career. You can see in 2021, when he had that big season with the Reds, he saw 24% of his offerings were sliders compared to 32% in his first year with the Phillies. This is an offering that Castellanos has really, really struggled with throughout his career. We can go look at his weighted on base against these three offerings, and you can see since 2019, he's really, really had a difficult time making solid contact against this pitch. 285 weighted on base, 294, 320, 276. These are atrocious numbers, right? And if you prefer the more quote unquote traditional stats, 247 batting average, not a whole lot of extra base hits here, considering he had 236 plate appearances that ended with the breaking ball. So this is really concerning to me. This is not something that I anticipate changing when you go back and you look at the pitch percentage here. If anything, I could see Castellanos seeing even more breaking balls in 2023 because pitchers now understand this is the way you get him out. And Major League Baseball is throwing more and more of the off-speed stuff. We talked about Kyle Wright. We've talked about Charlie Morton. We've talked about other guys already just within the NL East who have made curveballs and sliders and other offerings their primary pitch. So the less and less that Castellanos is seeing fastballs, the less and less optimistic I am in a resurgence year from him, which makes me, I mean, at 150 to 1 to win MVP, right? A guy who hit 34 home runs and drove in 100 runs 2 years ago. You think that's kind of crazy, but last season, again, you scroll up here and you look at the exit velocities regressed incredibly sharply, right? The average exit velocity, 22nd percentile. He ranked 200th out of 216 hitters in average exit velocity from August 1st until the end of the postseason. There was one little glimmer of hope that you did see from July 25th to September 2nd before he had the oblique injury, where he batted 318, had an 833 OPS, but by and large, it was just a really bad year for Castellanos, and he's saying all the right things in spring training, but no player's ever going to say all the wrong things in spring training. I would stay away from him in fantasy. I would avoid him like the plague in DFS early in the year, especially against guys who see a lot of or throw a lot of breaking balls, a lot of off-speed pitches. I think there are much better options in the outfield for people to target.
Yeah, the Phillies fans, I mean, you're paying him $20 million and you're doing it all the way until he's 35 years old in 2027. So you're praying, if you're a Phillies fan, that somehow Castellanos figures this out. Otherwise, it's going to be a classic. You know, let's say the Phillies are one of those teams that they're going to have a great 4 or 5 year run, and it's 2 years left on his deal, and it's the classic 34, 35-year-old who sits on your roster getting paid a shitload of money and does nothing for you, right? So you're hoping that he can turn it around. One of the things I find interesting about him too is where he's batting and where he batted in the lineup, and I would like your opinion on this. You know, he batted 4th in the lineup pretty much majority of his games, 65 games he batted in that 4th position. With adding Trea Turner and when Bryce Harper comes back in the mix, you know, if he continues to struggle, do you think they're throwing him back at 6 and making sure that JT Realmuto comes more back up into the lineup? You know, and you have Bryce Harper, Trea Turner, Schwarber. Like, where do you think he slates in this lineup if he starts to struggle the same way he struggled in 2022?
You have no choice but to move him down in the order, right?
You can't take a risk on him. Like, you can't just hope that he can, you know, make everything connect when you're in such a competitive division.
Well, especially when you have high contact guys like Alec Bohm, like Bryson Stott, further down in the order. In a year where small ball might make a little bit of a resurgence, if you have a guy on second base with nobody out, you need someone to put the ball in play to get him to third with 1 out. If you have a guy on third base with less than 2 outs, you need someone to make contact to get that guy in either with a fly ball or with a timely ground ball, well placed. So in the past, I think you saw managers make a lot of sacrifices in those situations where you're hoping for an extra base hit, you're hoping for a lot of damage done. I think you're going to see less and less of that going forward, and Nick Castellanos could be the poster child for that. I wouldn't be surprised to see him hitting 6th or 7th in the lineup if he continues to struggle early in the season. I think you have no choice.
Yeah. Let's wrap it up with the last key player I think to talk about with Philadelphia. We're not going to see him at the beginning of the season, but he has been electric for Philadelphia fans. I think it was a great thing when they signed him to the major deal that they got him at. Bryce Harper, you know, he opts for the Tommy John surgery on that right elbow. He played through the season at DH. You know, what do you think is the impact? Do you think that 89.5 Philadelphia is sitting at right now, over under 88.5? Do you think that the books are really playing that Bryce Harper loss and that's why it's so low? Or, you know, when he comes back in the lineup, man, Philadelphia's got a scary lineup when Bryce Harper comes back. So what are your expectations for Bryce Harper's impact?
Well, number one, don't bet him 80 to 1 to win the MVP. The guy is not going to play anywhere near enough games. Just getting that out there. It's a really deceiving line by the books. It's going to take advantage of casual bettors who are thinking that not realizing that Bryce Harper is not going to be ready for opening day, or not realizing that Bryce Harper is going to miss 2+ months of the season. So don't even think about betting him 80 to 1 to win MVP. It won't happen. There's literally a 0% chance that will happen. With Bryce Harper, there's going to be a temptation to rush him back, right? Bryce Harper's a gamer. Bryce Harper hated last year just having a DH, right? He wasn't able to play in the field. He talked about it openly to the media that it made him sick to just have to go up and swing the bat, go back to the dugout and watch the game until his turn in the order came back up again. But when you look at last year, 151 plate appearances after he came back from that thumb injury, He batted only 227. He's under contract for the next decade. There's a lot of reasons to be prudent with his rehab process. When he does come back, he's going to be a major boon to the lineup. There's absolutely no argument against that, especially against right-hand pitching. Bryce Harper is an elite hitter. And again, you see right-handed pitching way more than you see left-handed pitching. So his struggles against lefties are not a huge concern. Otherwise he wouldn't have got a 13-year deal worth over $300 million, right? So Bryce Harper, when he comes back, he's an MVP candidate for a reason. He's won the award multiple times for obvious reasons. You got to hope he's healthy. You worry about guys coming back from serious surgeries like that. Baseball's a sport where you need a lot of little pieces in your hands and your arms and your forearms and all of this stuff to be working properly to have the desired impact on the baseball that you want to have. It's not like a sport like basketball where if you're physical enough, you can get to the rim, get to the foul line, or just shoot the basketball effectively. In baseball, it's a little bit tougher. So I would pump the brakes a little bit on Harper coming back and looking like he did in his MVP seasons, but Harper at his worst is still 25-30% better than the league average hitter. They'll slot him right back into the middle of that order, and they'll be glad that they have him. It's going to be interesting to see how quickly they're able to get him back on the field, because Tommy John is no joke, whether it's for a hitter or a pitcher.
Yeah, I think what's going to be interesting with the Phillies to watch, I think how the division is going to play out. This is my prediction. Obviously, I could be totally wrong. And next preview for 2024 team previews, eat my words on Atlanta, because I'm buying them pretty hot in this division. I wouldn't be shocked. Atlanta's just going to hum and just, lead the division comfortably, right? And the Mets are going to do really well at the beginning of the season. We talked about some durability concerns with them. So I think that they'll do well. And Philly kind of lags behind in that third place spot without Bryce Harper, and takes them a little bit to get off. And then when the Mets go from doing, I think, this at the beginning of the season to starting to do this a little bit, where we see maybe a Max Scherzer injury, a Justin Verlander injury, it will coincide with Bryce Harper getting back, and they'll do this. But Bryce Harper and the Phillies are going to do this. And that's what's going to make the race, in my opinion, a little bit more interesting. So I do think that he has a massive impact. It's hard to go back to past stats to compare, because Bryce Harper has never really been ultimately healthy. Even in 2021, he still missed about 20 or so games with nagging injuries when he had an MVP caliber season, 35 home runs at 429 on base percentage and an over 6 slug. So it's a huge impact to their lineup. And I think they'll get him in at the right time. That'll make Philadelphia really exciting for midsummer. And kind of going off that, let's get into our final conclusions. We talked in detail about this team. There's a lot of awesome things to talk about. I think you have a lot of things to be excited for Philadelphia. What do you think? Where do you've already picked their ultimate rivals in New York to win the division and probably be one of the most electric.
They will be. I mean, the Mets will win the division. The Mets will win the division. They will.
So where do you see Philadelphia?
I don't know where you're getting these angles and whatever you're just doing with your hands.
Listen, I just want to hear, where do you see Philadelphia slotting in the division?
I think they finished third. I like them to go over 88.5 wins. So I don't think they fall flat on their face. But missing Harper at the start of the year, the defensive concerns that we've highlighted multiple times at the corner of the infield and the corner of the outfield are not something to gloss over. I think they're third. I think we see something similar to last year, where you saw the Mets and the Braves both pushing 100 wins going right down to the final weekend of the season. And then you see Philadelphia pretty content to be in a wild card position, because they understand that they're missing their best hitter in the lineup. They're missing an MVP caliber player. They'll do enough to contend for a postseason spot, right? We've talked about the manager. I'm a huge believer in Rob Thompson. I'm a huge believer in the addition of Trea Turner, especially with the bigger bases and some of the other offensive rule changes that we've seen this year. So I like what Philadelphia has done. The bullpen was a major concern last year. It was a problem of epic proportions in years before that. So finally having some more reinforcements, bringing in Kimbrel, bringing in Soto, going to get a guy like Matt Strahm, who I think is going to have a productive season, signing Alvarado and Dominguez long-term, giving them peace of mind and security. The team has a lot of good pieces. It's definitely a 90-win team in my mind. The main risk factor, again, is the defense, right? Defense can derail a season quicker than people realize. And God forbid they do have an injury to a guy like JT Realmuto or Trea Turner. Turner is wearing the double oven mitts on his gloves, on his hands this year on the bases. He's talked about how much he hates it, how uncomfortable it is, but he understands how important his availability is to this ball club. Assuming they don't have any other major injuries outside of Harper, I like them to go over 88.5 wins, but I do think they finished third in this division behind the Mets and the Braves.
Yeah, I think we had a disagreement with Atlanta and New York, but we're not going to disagree with Philly. I agree. I think that they're in the division. I have them going over as well. I see them as like a 92, 93 win team. I think the reason why I have the NL East winning so many games is because I'm not very high on the NL Central this year. I think like the Cardinals are going to have some players that are going to fall off from their past numbers, like Arenado and Goldschmidt, that aren't going to repeat that MVP form. And I think their pitching struggle. So I think you'll have like an NL Central. Like I wouldn't be surprised if an NL Central team wins 89 games and wins the division. Therefore, allows some of these larger, like the Padres, the Dodgers, Atlanta, the Mets, and the Phillies to pick up wins. That's why I think the NL East will be so close. So I think that they for sure will lock in a spot in the postseason. I think they'll be a fun team of the summer when Bryce Harper gets back. So I think they'll be a great story. And one of the hottest teams. I think a lot of pundits will be high on Philadelphia when we come close to the postseason. I just don't see them challenging the consistency of Atlanta and how they've been able year in, year out to kind of own that division. And I also don't see how the Mets, unless it's the nightmare scenario that we laid out in our Mets video, which you can go out and give a watch to. If it's that nightmare scenario, then, Phillies could very well make a run at the division, but it's dependent in my mind if the Mets really do fall off the cliff. So I like Philly at the over. I like Philly to make a postseason push. I would stay away from, them winning the pennant and them winning the World Series. I don't think they're deep enough for that. But I like Philadelphia. I think Philadelphia fans have a lot of things to be excited about. I wouldn't be surprised after a solid campaign, everyone healthy, us going into 2024, that I might pick them to finally win the division and like go over the hump. I just don't see it this year.
Good stuff. Good stuff. I think the one thing that neither of us have mentioned to this point as well, with regard to each of us having the over on each of the three Braves, Mets, and Phillies on their win total this year, is every team is also going to play every team this year for the first time in Major League Baseball history. And there's a lot of bad teams in the American League, right? The Oakland Athletics, it's debatable how much they're going to try to win baseball games. I think the consensus is they're probably a 60-win team again, maybe 65 wins. The Royals and the Tigers, two teams that project to be well below 500 again. The rest of the AL Central is sort of up in the air as well. I think nobody would be surprised if any of the Guardians, White Sox, or Twins won 90 or 95 games, but it wouldn't be the most shocking thing in the world if any of those three teams underperformed as well. And then you have Boston and Baltimore, two wild cards in the American League East as well. So it's not just the Central that they're going to be picking on. They're going to have more opportunities to pick at the American League this year as well, which could result in a little bit of National League domination from some of these upper echelon teams like the Braves, like the Mets, like the Phillies, and probably the Dodgers and the Padres again this summer. Anything else on these guys before we get out of here?
No, man. I mean, nice 2-hour long conversation about Philadelphia, and I think they're worth every word. They're a fun team. I think the Mets are built to win now. Atlanta's built to win long term, but Philadelphia is kind of like slating themselves in there where they're kind of built to be best of both worlds. They have the guys like to push in for win now, but they also have done a very good job at locking up some of these younger players. So I think it'll be a really fun division. And I very much enjoyed talking about these three teams, and I think Philadelphia rounds out that very great conversations about how this division, I think, will own baseball this year.
Yeah. Well, I do appreciate you making time to join for the conversation on each of these three teams. I very much look forward to the Mets winning the division, and I'm sure we'll have some fun with that as well. But guys, again, if you're not tuned into Gio's content, his biggest presence is over on Instagram, does a lot of really engaging, awesome videos and reels, breaking down advanced analytics, putting things into really digestible packages to help people enjoy baseball, make it more accessible. And as you've seen on these last three videos, very, very sharp baseball mind. He's going to be doing a lot of content with us throughout the regular season as well. So really appreciate you joining, Gio. Looking forward to having you back throughout the year. And guys, I will just say, if you find the content valuable, please like, share, subscribe, tell a friend. It's been really, really cool to see all the support on the channel. We haven't even been doing this for a month, and we have almost 200 subscribers. Would love to just keep elevating the channel. The more and more support we get, the more and more we can just keep coming at you with a lot of high quality research and insight. So please consider subscribing. It's free, doesn't cost you anything. Tell a friend if you like it. We will be here every single day this year, providing a lot of great content for you guys. So appreciate you for tuning in. It's all timestamped. Check out the other videos. We're going to have all 30 teams in 30 days leading to opening day. Until we see you again, thank you guys.
Thanks, guys.